So at this time, I'm pleased to turn the presentation over to Susan Ulrich and Debra Collins. Please go ahead.
Good morning or good afternoon and welcome. This is Sue Ulrich speaking, and I'm delighted to be working with Debra Collins as we present our experiences with transition to practice. During our hour together, we'll explore the healthcare environment in Nevada and discuss challenges precipitating our application for grant funds from the Department of Labor. We'll also explore the evolution of the Healthcare 2020 and GAP-RN transition to practice programs. We'll discuss best practices learned from 6 years of grant participation, and we'll share with you things we learned along the way that may benefit you and your program. And at the close, Debra will be sharing her insights on nurse apprenticeships. So, Deb, take it away.
Thank you, Sue. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We are pleased to be with you today. So I want to begin with the snapshot of Nevada's healthcare environment. Going back to the, I'm going to begin at the sector council. So in 2010, 2011, Governor Sandoval here in the state of Nevada wanted to diversify our economy. At the time, we were strictly hospitality and gaming. So he identified sectors. One was healthcare. And so I was brought on to develop a healthcare workforce for our workforce board. So from then, we were able to work with the Robert Johnson Foundation and develop the Nevada Action Coalition. And we are a member of the Future of Nursing Campaign for Action. It's a national-wide movement to improve health and healthcare of all Americans throughout nursing. And it's an initiative of AARP and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and the campaign includes action coalitions in 50 states and the District of Columbia, working to implement the Institute of Medicine's Future of Nursing recommendations. So the recommendations were brief. There was a report that came out December 2015, and looking at how we could improve the healthcare for our states. So the IOM recommendations, there are 8. Remove scope of practice barriers, expand the opportunities for nurses to lead and diffuse collaborative improvement efforts, implement nurse residencies, increase the proportion of nurses with a baccalaureate degree to 80 to 20 by 2020, double the number of nurses with a doctorate by 2020, ensure the nurses engage in lifelong learning, prepare and enable nurses to lead change to advance health, and the last is to build an infrastructure for the collection of analysis of interprofessional healthcare workforce data. And so that's where we came about with the Nevada Action Coalition. So we actually selected the implementation of nurse residencies and also to increase our number of baccalaureate nurses. And so as you see with the slide, this is an updated slide. We have improved dramatically. When we first started the work, the average age of the RN was 51. We didn't have as many as far as diverse nurses. Men in nursing, we began at about 10%. Now we are at 15.9%. And we are, compared to nationally, we are one of the highest states of having male nurses. And so with the Action Coalition, we were looking at age, we were looking at ethnicity, gender, race, and social economic for our state status. And with that work, we also decided that instead of just working on the 2 recommendations, that we would work on all 8. So we were very ambitious for our state because we say here in the state of Nevada that if you should be first, you're last. And so we then identified what we call recommendation champions. And so we had individuals who were subject matter experts to work on all 8 recommendations. And then because we have such a rural state, we also reached out to our rural partners, and what we have are called our area champions. And so we were able to work with the entire state because Nevada has been divided. We have a northern Nevada and southern Nevada. And so we felt it was important for our work, for the Nevada Action Coalition, to bring people together, to bring the nursing community together and work on the initiative. So we were very inclusive of everyone. And as you see on the slide as well, we have 8.7 Hispanic nurses compared to 28% overall of our population, and that was another issue that we wanted to identify. So with that, we also work with our ethnic nurses. So we did not have a Hispanic Nurses Association, so the Action Coalition seeded money to assist with that development. So we now have a Hispanic Nurses Association group, and we also began working with the Southern Nevada Black Nurses Association as well. We're also working with our Men in Nursing. We did not have a chapter here, which we have now, and just to facilitate their work. And we also have 32 chairs. We decided to develop what is called a nurse specialty group. So we have over 32 chairs of ethnic and specialty nurse organizations to continue the work of our diversity workforce. And also Nursing on Boards was another initiative of the Nevada Action Coalition. So with this work, with the coalition and working for workforce boards, I was recruited to begin, as I stated earlier, a workforce healthcare program. And so working at the Workforce Board, we have two boards here in the state of Nevada, one in the north, one in the south. And so we met with healthcare partners to see how we could mitigate the problem of our need of nurses and also producing nursing residencies, and then working with our newly licensed nurse employers, because we were finding that we were graduating a great number of nurses, new grads. However, the system were not hiring them for whatever that reason was. And so we were looking at ways how we could mitigate that. So a little bit about grants for DOL for WIA Workforce Investment Act. And now we have signed into law, is now called WIOA, which is the Workforce Innovation Opportunities. And so with the grants from DOL, most people probably don't know about the funding, but most areas do have local workforce boards. And so the nurse leaders got together and they put together a grant request for WIOA funds, and they were granted $750,000 for a pilot, and I'll go more into that later. But just to talk a little bit of how services are funded through DOL. So the funds are there, Department of Labor. The funds then are given to your governor in your states, and they are Title I, or what workforce investment dollars are, and that is adult, dislocated worker, and youth. There are also other titles, so there's titles 2, 3, 4, 5, and that encompasses older adults. It's Wagner-Pizer dollars. It is also other providers that also receive funding. So your Persons with Disabilities Act, all of that. So when the funds come to your governor, then the funds are then given to the state workforce investment boards. And with that, there's usually about a 15 to 20% set aside for each state. And these are for mandated activities that the governor deems. And these are allowable discretionary activities, which are great because they don't hold to the same stringent WIA policies and procedures. So from there, the state workforce boards, then the funds are dispersed to the two local workforce boards, which are here in our state. Nevada Works up north, Workforce Connections here in the south. And then what happens is that the two boards then publish an RFP, request for proposal, for funds for projects. And then that's what we call service providers. That funding then goes to the service providers to provide the workforce work. And then from there, the funds then are used for customers, for training, for other ancillary items that they may need, whether it's books, tuition, housing, car repairs, whatever it is that that participant needs in order to be successful for their job placement or their training. So the evolution of the healthcare programs there at the local workforce boards, while I was working there, there was a group that I was working with that had a small grant of about $25,000, and it was a Department of Labor program. And while working with them, it gave me the insight of Native Americans and their youth, individuals. And so I worked with them to produce the first healthcare program, and it was called Critical Condition. And because it was called Critical Condition because of the nature of our healthcare workforce for nursing and allied health. So these were nursing students. The program consisted of one, nursing students who fell short of passing the state boards. And so I wanted to work with them to figure out how we could mitigate that. Was it additional training? What did we need to do with working with our system of higher ed? Also, nurses with expired license. We had a large number of nurses who allowed their license to expire, but in order for them to regain that, they would have to go further north near Utah to take training on site in order for them to obtain their license. And there was only one program that the state of Nevada worked with. And also incumbent workers. We looked at backfilling. So as we were working with training folks in either nursing or allied, how could we backfill those vacancies to maintain that constant flow of healthcare workforce? And also we worked towards increasing the number of clinical sites and affiliate agencies. So that meant working with all of our deans statewide and seeing how we could come together with some type of process so that we had the number of clinical sites in order to keep students coming through the program. So the second program was the evolution of the healthcare program. The other program was with Southern Nevada Medical Industry Coalition, and this was a huge coalition that had a numerous amount of healthcare partners. And so this was the second RFP that I placed out while working at Workforce Connections, and it was to look at placing new grads into OJTs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, looking at incumbent, entry-level healthcare workers in management or leadership, and to increase the capacity there, and also training and placement of 20 entry-level workers to do the backfill for the vacancies that were created from the incumbent workers, and then also with the healthcare information technology. So the beautiful part about the OJT and working with Southern Nevada Medical Industry Coalition is that it allowed us to pay, and this is your workforce boards, 50% of that employee's wages. So if a nurse grad was coming in and she was making $30 an hour, then we could pay $15 of her wages. And it was usually a 90-day on-the-job training. But then when we looked at specialization and possibly some of the new grads needing additional time to train, then we could actually extend that up to 6 months, which was a win-win for our hospital partners. And then from there, we looked at allied health and management and leadership, and then looking at backfilling those positions and just keeping that constant turning of employment. And then also we developed the Healthcare Information Technology program, writing curriculum, assistance to 45 new grads in the program. It was a new program that was delivered at College of Southern Nevada, and then using that same type of program with the on-the-job training to help the hospitals hire someone new, pay 50% of the wages, and then again doing the backfilling of that. So the pilot now, we're starting those two pilots and looking at funding statewide, and this was between November of 2011 through April of 2012. There's been over $472,000 plus for WIA funding. We've had 57 new grads that are newly enrolled and 93 grads that are enrolled in retention follow-up. Because what happens is once they go through our program, they go into follow-up. And I'll talk more about that. 97% of new grad nurses were employed. They've been retained, 99% have been retained, and the average cost was $47.5, and the average wage, $28 an hour. And the 2012 program extended statewide to Nevada Works, who had received $500,000 back in 2012, and each year they have been funded over $500,000 to maintain that program every year. So to talk a little bit more about what I'm talking about as far as retention, the individuals are actually placed into a dual partnership. So it was with SNMIC or the Native American community with their program, and then also they would receive a career coach from the workforce development side. And so after they completed their training, they would be in retention and follow up for up to 1 year after completion. And this was to ensure that each of the participants had whatever it was that they needed to maintain that job, maintain their housing. If they lost their job, we would bring them in, we would reassess them, place them in another position, and again, work with them and making sure and ensuring that they would be successful. So that was the other piece. They had two partners to basically undergird that student, new grad, or the employees who were the allied health participants. So next, we're going to talk about the evolution of the program. So after SNIC was transferred, that particular program, the Healthcare 2020, was then transitioned to the Nevada Hospital Association. And that's where it increased because the Healthcare Association they represented all of the hospitals. And so it was a great way for advocacy for us. We were able to continue with the pass-through money, and it just opened that up. So instead of working with one healthcare system, we were able to work with all healthcare systems throughout the state of Nevada. And the ability to influence the North and the South regions to take a look at this program and working with the workforce boards, which they had never done before. And of course, we know as our hospital systems, it was about the bottom line, looking at funding. And so when we came with this 50%, that opened up the doors, the floodgates came where we couldn't quite keep up with the need of all of our new grads and expanding that. So the elements of the Healthcare 2020, that particular program, and for both really, was workforce support, so the tuition reimbursement, which meant the 50%. Support services were books. It could mean shoes, it could be uniforms, whatever it is that that individual needed. If they came in and they were behind on their utility bills or their housing, that all fell under support services. So the WIA funds would support that. And also the on-the-job training subsidy, and that is your 50%. The tuition reimbursement, if there were courses that the individual needed or as far as training, then we have what is called an ETPL, which is a eligible training provider list. And so the person can look on that list and we pay 100% of that tuition for that individual. And that goes up to as much as $15,000 for training. Plus, we also supplied the screening of the applicants. So we provided an initial assessment. We now use the work keys assessment. Also, as we said, the on-the-job training, preceptors, and also the interview for the employment. We would have bring in our nursing deans and individuals, and I'm sure that Sue will talk more about this, to help our new grads with interviewing and employment. And then also academia, working with them, the transition to program. It was evidence-based, and Sue will go more into this, delivered online. And also the Nevada State Board of Nursing supports this, as well as our continuing education and referral to the program. So Sue, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. So now we're going to take an in-depth look at the transition to practice program elements. One healthcare system in the state was using a proprietary transition to program product. The remaining healthcare providers were still orienting new grads to their facilities, incorporating traditional organizational orientation components. That orientation lasted from 1 to 3 weeks, and new grad attrition rates at these acute care facilities was about 42% statewide. Not only were new grads leaving their positions within the first year of practice, but they also reported leaving the profession altogether, some having experienced a critical incident without the benefit of debriefing, so we lost them as nurses. A national initiative for transitioning newly licensed nurses into practice was launched by the National Council of State Boards of Nursing as a result of publishing their transition to practice model. And concurrently, the cues and competencies, the quality and safety education for nurses were being developed and refined. And this is about the same time the Commission of Collegiate Nursing Education began developing their accreditation standards for transition to practice programs and nurse residencies. And similarly, the Institute of Medicine put out their call for action in its published report on the future of nursing, recommending not only transition to practice programs, but also transition in practice programs for nurses wishing to career ladder into another aspect of nursing. So these resources, combined with the Joint Commission's National Patient Safety Goals, provided the foundation for the program development of the Healthcare 2020 Transition to Practice program, which focused on increasing new grad confidence and competence as strategies to ensure delivery of safe and quality care. Educational elements included collaboration, online classes, simulation training, supervised clinical experiences, and mentoring and coaching. So using evidence to guide its development, Healthcare 2020 program incorporated knowledge, skills, and abilities in online classes and modules, and the KSAs were actualized through knowledge assignments, clinical applications, and discussions. A faculty member worked with students as they progressed through the online learning activities, and this person was seen as neutral. She was not a hostile employee, but was rather hired by the program and was a program faculty member, providing support to the students both in the online environment and also through individual coaching. Comprehensive case studies focused on frequently seen cardiovascular and respiratory diagnoses, and they were facilitated in small group discussions by an educator with experience in intensive care and med-surg nursing. Simulations were constructed using the patients discussed in the comprehensive case studies, and students worked together in pairs and in teams moving through the simulations. Interprofessional communication, standardized communication for handoff report, patient assessment, and collaboration were key concepts practiced along with skills identified by more than 600 previous students as being scary or skills with which they wish to have more experience. And a few of these included central line changes, trach care, blood products administration, and of course, IV starts. While the new grads might not be exposed to these skills in actual practice, repeated exposure in the skills lab was provided in an effort to reduce their anxiety. So students were placed with one preceptor initially for 180 hours of clinical while they were also engaged in these online learning activities. Nurses having participated in a formal preceptor education program were identified and solicited for their participation. They did not receive monetary stipend or any type of award. The precepted clinical experiences served as an opportunity for authentic assessment by the potential employer and offered the student a chance to see if the organization was a good fit. And I'm using the term student and participant interchangeably here. So what did they need to do? Participants were responsible for completing each of these activities. Simulation included not only managing the rapidly changing patient condition, but also included the comprehensive case studies, EKG review, arterial blood gas review, and skills practice. And again, these skills were selected for refreshing through feedback from participations of being concerned to them. And participants also provided peer feedback on performance during the simulations, practicing a leadership skill required of practice. Online learning activities were approved by the Nevada State Board of Registered Nursing for 27 continuing education credits. And while the CEU were not relevant to first-time licensees, they were of value to participants who were returning to practice or participants expanding their practice into acute care. The Commission on Post-Secondary Education became involved in this and wanted to know about their responsibility in validating the course. But then after collaboration, they backed out, and with the approval of the Nevada State Board of Nursing, the program became not accredited, but vetted by the professional, by the Council of Nursing, which then put its stamp of approval on it. So the Post-Secondary Education Committee did not have influence in it. Leadership coaching prepared the students for high-stake interviews, and while employers had the opportunity to assess students during their clinical preceptorships for attitude and aptitude, leadership coaching also provided a forum for formative assessment. Students prepared their resumes, dressed for success, and were interviewed by healthcare executive nurses, nurse managers, directors, and assistant directors of HR. And a unique approach to the interview process provided the student with immediate feedback from the interviewers. Program enrollment, program and employer orientations were completed during the first week, and they took about 15 hours. Facilitated clinical experiences by a dedicated preceptor provided the students with on-the-job training. As previously mentioned, preceptors were required to have 1 year's experience and must have participated in a preceptor development program. Preceptors were oriented to the program and were afforded the opportunity to participate in the online learning activities. By participating, preceptors earned CEU. However, their participation in the course also bridged the knowledge gap. Preceptors knew the goals and objectives for each student's clinical responsibilities on a day-to-day basis. So what were we expecting to happen? While we were anticipating these outcomes, participants described feeling more confident and competent after participating in the program and shared feelings of being ready for employment. The clinical requirement originally included 180 clinical hours, but we brought the employers and students back as evaluation, and both the employers and participants, provided feedback that 120 clinical hours were adequate for course completion. Having previous experience, some program graduates were hired right into full-time positions. However, most of the participants moved into the employer's transition to practice course. So, pilot outcomes through the Southern Nevada Medical Industry Coalition. These were the outcomes, and the reporting indicators for the workforce grant included recruitment, retention, and hourly wage over the course of 1 year. Recruitment indicates the number of participants in the program. Retention is the number of participants finishing the program, and hourly wage is just that, the amount of money they earn per hour. Healthcare 2020 reported 100% recruitment and 100% retention with an average wage of $28 an hour. And keeping in mind, this was several years ago. These exceptional recruitment and retention data were attributed to the inclusion of nurse employers in sourcing and screening program applicants. This is really, really key to program success, in my opinion. In addition, employers were subsidized to 50% of program participant wages for 3 months. So based upon these outcome data, subsequent funding for transition to practice was expanded, as Deb said, to the Nevada's 2 workforce investment boards. And students were recruited for participation in both Reno and Las Vegas areas, representing the North and South geographic regions. Rural hospitals were invited to participate in the program in subsequent funding years. Retaining rural participants was challenging for several reasons. First, limited human resources to support program elements was a challenge. For example, on our visit to the rural hospitals, we found that one of the DON at the hospital was also the DON of the nursing at the acute care hospital across the street. She was also the ER manager providing care to patients as they came in for treatment, so she didn't have time to precept a newly graduated nurse. Second, we found that new grads were motivated to work in urban settings, so they'd leave their rural setting and come to the city to gain crucial experience before returning back home to their rural practice setting, so then they were no longer new graduates. And third, employment work opportunities in rural settings were limited. Working where they lived and providing services for their neighbors was a way of life for rural nurses. They had a strong sense of community and remained employed in their positions. So let's take a look at some of the employment outcomes. Part of the role of the case manager, as Deb mentioned, is to check on participants each month. This was done either by phone call, email, or text messaging. Case notes were made and outcome data were reported to the Workforce Investment Board. The data shown here included allied health participants, which skewed the outcome for transition to practice. It was not an isolated number that we were looking at, so nurse-specific data were not reported. Though through case management communication, it was learned that graduates of the program did quit their jobs. Moving to a different hospital and returning to their home states to practice were reasons frequently reported for terminating their employment. So we had a change in funding, and that resulted in a change in who was coordinating the program. And we call it the evolution of the healthcare program, expansion of partnership to include academic settings. So the change in funding led to a change in program management, with Healthcare 2020 moving from the Nevada Hospital Association to a university setting. The program was rebranded as the GAP RN training program, and it was solely funded through a grant from Workforce Connections, the Workforce Investment Board of Southern Nevada. So this funding allowed for program expansion to serve unemployed new grad nurses, nurses returning to practice after a break of 5 years or more, nurses moving from the community setting to acute care, and nurses leaving long-term or post-acute care also for the acute care settings. In a workforce environment where new grad nurses were coveted, failure to pass the NCLEX exam on the first attempt, starting families, or accepting the first job offer and then leaving the position were common reasons for their unemployment. The GAP RN program was coordinated by the Department of Ed Outreach, which was self-funded at this particular university, and we'll discuss the benefits of that relationship in just a few moments. Grant money was awarded to the university to continue transitioning nurses to practice. Because the program was self-funded, meaning no subsidy came from the university, program fees were established. As a note, students were responsible for paying for the required background check. While student and supportive services were provided through the grant, it became apparent that students also needed to have a vested interest in the program's financing. So we asked them to contribute financially by paying for their background check, which then made them have skin in the game. Nevada residency was another requirement of the grant, and in a few instances, students relocated from adjoining states so they could participate in the program. Participants were also required to have an active nursing license or be in the process of renewing their license through the Nurse Refresher Program, and both Sallie Mae and private pay were also provided and accepted, though seldom used. As a result of the change in program management, the model for student recruitment changed. Instead of the nurse employers sourcing and screening applicants, the university solicited participation through email blasts, info sessions, and advertising on their webpage. Recruitment became a challenge. Even though their tuition was fully subsidized, participants were reluctant to take a chance on giving up 8 weeks of their time without a guaranteed job. So to mitigate some of their concern, a guaranteed job interview with the employer was added to the program. The university became the repository for all these required student data. You can see that there were educator requirements, workforce connection requirements, or the Workforce Investment Board requirements, and hospital and employer requirements. Data were gathered, assessed, and we made portfolios for each qualifying applicant. The portfolios were sent to participating nurse employers, and yes, permission was granted by each applicant for the release of their information. So then we began the application screening process. Hospital participation in student selection was a key. As you remember with the Healthcare 2020 program, the hospitals or nurse employers sourced and screened applicants, resulting in outstanding and recruitment and retention rates. With the GAP RN program, applicants were presented to the employers who then completed a pre-program interview. Once they passed the interview, applicants attended a grant-related orientation and were then offered a placement. And by the way, the hospitals were asked to identify units which would be hiring, and successful candidates were matched with the unit, increasing their chances for post-program employment. Once the participants were accepted into their placements, they started the 8-week program. So let's take a look at beneficial collaborations. my gosh, we had a lot of people supporting us in this endeavor. Nurse employers were not limited to just acute care facilities. Clinical partners expanded and included subacute facilities and even outpatient clinical settings such as chemotherapy and infusion clinics. The Nevada State Board of Nursing was a valuable partner as well. It provided the course for CEU, provided links to the course through their website, and they directly referred nurses new to the state to the program, and they also included the program description and updates in their publication. Schools of Nursing promoted the program by inviting us to speak during one of their senior level courses. Understanding that ongoing nursing program accreditation is linked to new grad employment, hard-to-place graduates were referred to the program. And hard-to-place graduates were usually those who did not pass the NCLEX on their first attempt. Professional nursing organizations such as the Filipino Nurses and the Black Nurses Associations invited us to their meetings as guest speakers. A number of the association members served as preceptors and even became our new nurse mentors. The Nevada Action Coalition, as Deb described, embraced our Transition to Practice program as a statewide initiative and supported the program for several years. And lastly, the Nevada Organization of Nurse Executives was key for information dissemination. The GAP program coordinator attended meetings and provided updates which facilitated communication throughout all represented healthcare settings. While the enrollment process seemed tidy and well organized, there were challenges, I tell you. Immunization verification and doctor's appointments did not always coincide with the enrollment process schedule. Physician appointments were months out, making employment physicals difficult to complete within the allotted time frame. Initially, anyone who was selected by the employer after the pre-program interview and who qualified for grant support was accepted into the program. However, we noticed that there were a number of participants who were not completing the program. So we added an assessment question asking about competing responsibilities. It was revealed that participants who were going to school full-time and working full-time were less likely to complete the program. And in Nevada, they were not necessarily working in healthcare. Many of our participants were working in the entertainment or restaurant business, and so they were working shift work as well. So we began to only admit participants who either worked full-time or went to school full-time, and not the dreaded triangle of going to school and working and participating in the program. This strategy decreased the attrition rate. Placements were based on units attending to hire within 90 days. And of course, some of our participants wanted their dream job, and we weren't able to provide that. But we did encourage the participants to become part of the healthcare organization and then move within the organization as they developed requisite skills and experience. Participants were allowed to cancel up to 48 hours prior to the start of the program, and some did, leaving last-minute spaces in the cohort. So we began a backup list and pre-qualified standby participants to fill the short notice vacancy. Now we're going to go into the advantages of our collaboration. So in this situation, the education partner was the coordinator of the program. So as you think about this program, it may not be the education partner who is the coordinator. It might be a hospital or another entity. But for this case, it was the education partner. So what's the benefit of that is brand recognition, existing infrastructure and systems were some of the outstanding benefits, and allowed us to expedite some of the processes. Another key point is that all participants were enrolled as university students, which allowed them to fall under the university's insurance umbrella. We also encouraged them to secure professional liability insurance. Memorandum of understanding were in place, which reduced the time for going through legal for approval through that behemoth organization. The university was also vetted as an eligible training provider, as Deb had mentioned earlier, and it allowed for tuition reimbursements and supportive services for approved programs. And as mentioned previously, Sallie Mae funding was available through the university. So how did we do? Participants felt more confident and competent after participating in the program, as you can see by their improvement. And then we asked them, how likely were you to recommend the GAP RN program for other people? and participants were satisfied and would recommend the program to others. So we felt very optimistic and very pleased about the success of this program. And finally, in recruitment and retention in the GAP-RN program with our academic partner, we had a 91% employment rate, and of those 91%, participants continued to remain employed over 1 year, which is awesome. And that's within that organization. So let's take a look at best practices. Role designation is important in reducing confusion. Knowing responsibilities associated with the role and sharing this information with partners facilitated communication. Articulating this information in written format was really helpful. Ensuring that the instructor of the course or the program understands the objectives, roles, responsibilities, and that that person has a clear understanding of the program was imperative. This is a really key point, because this person is the first-line communicator with students, nurse employers, and with service providers. Their enthusiasm or lack of it can impact the program in many ways. Offering information sessions where the potential participants met the program coordinator and course faculty enhanced trust and provided transparency. Having the opportunity to ask questions, share concerns and expectations minimized turnover and maximized retention. Helpful strategies to update partners and potential partners included scheduled monthly collaborative meetings and attendance at professional meetings to share updates. While we didn't get around to it, developing a blog as a way to disseminate information seemed like a good idea. We structured program target dates so the dates were very clear. Program dates did not work well as on-demand training. The calendar was posted on the program website and modifications were sent to constituents, ensuring that everyone was engaged appropriately and misunderstandings were kept to a minimum. Many resources were needed to ensure the success of this program, and most were human-related. So treating our constituents respectfully of their time, among other things, served to strengthen our partnerships. Scheduling one cohort per nurse employer simplified our enrollment and enhanced constituent communication to maximize time management. And an indirect benefit resulted as these cohorts provided support with participants even after completing the program. So what are some of the best practices for hospital or nurse employers? There's a great deal of difference between a healthcare organization's orientation and a transition to practice program. Educating potential employer partners of the difference is critical in meeting their expectations for program length, anticipating resources needed, and determining timeframes for onboarding activities. Clustering presentations with educators, unit directors, and preceptors facilitated communication. Providing easy-to-read handouts that incorporated quick references such as key contact information also enhanced communication. Preceptors needed to be apprised of their roles and responsibilities as important contributors to the program. TIP faculty needed to have access to preceptors' contact information so they could schedule student-related conferences, provide assessment documents, and for gathering longitudinal data. Preceptors were honored for their contributions through hosted luncheons, recognition pins, and thank you letters sent to their administrators for inclusion into their personnel files. We've spoken about pre-program interviews. Guaranteed post-program interviews provided for a summative assessment of the program participant. It also the guaranteed interview resulted in more program applications. Establishing and knowing the program liaison from each of the employer partners saved time and energy. Also clearly identifying the program coordinator to constituents minimized confusion. So Deb is next going to discuss the best practices for service providers in case management.
Thank you, Sue. So we found that working with our service providers, and those are the individuals who responded to the request for proposal from dollars from the local workforce boards, and we could call them again service providers. So they were the ones that provided the case management, the enrollment, initial enrollment into the program, so then we could then pay for the transition into practice program. So we decided that a group enrollment for all participants at once was easier. So once the students were identified, everyone would come to one room. We had multiple paperwork, working in government. You probably, if some of you have, there is so much paperwork, and so we streamline the paperwork to make it easier. So the folders were placed together. We explained what each of the documents meant, and individuals were able to sign. So that kind of moved that process of the orientation and enrollment, because an enrollment can take up to an hour or two, depending on who you're speaking with and what the needs are of that participant. And then to be able to provide that one-on-one case management for participants. And so I had selected one provider to work on this project with us, and then identify one case manager who could work with us on this project. So that was also a best practice. And also by that, she understood the support services that would be needed as far as the books and the uniforms and shoes and whatever that person needed to be fully whole in order to enter into the program. And I would say lessons learned was when you identify that case manager, is that you also, and if it's a person that doesn't understand healthcare or has never worked in healthcare or essentially nursing, then it's bringing that person in, providing that technical assistance to them so they understand, one, the industry, but understand nursing as a whole, the requirements of nursing, having them participate in some of the courses, the sim lab, all of that. So that was definitely something that I would say was a huge compliment to our program. And we had a wonderful case manager who identified with the students and was there for them and traveled and visited with them. And so that was wonderful. The other is best practices for workforce investment boards is the OJT, the on-the-job training, contracting with an employer, either in the public or private, or the nonprofit or private sector. That was key. And through the OJT contract, it allowed us, the occupational training was provided for the participant through our ETPL, and then also it was the exchange of the 50% wage rate, which was great for the employers. And then also OJT, one thing, must lead to long-term employment. So after that on-the-job training, which was a win for us through this program, is that the persons received the training that the employer requested. We then engaged with the reimbursement of 50%, which is a win for the employers. And then knowing that that particular individual would have long-term employment, which is one of our performance measurements for WIA and WIOA, is that we want to see that person employed after a year after training, or an OJT. So that was a win for the workforce board. So it was just a natural fit for us. It met our performance and wage as well, and retention, as Sue also spoke about. So now I'm going to transition into apprenticeships, and I'm just going to talk briefly about that. So in July of 2017, the Registered Apprenticeship Program and the State Council transferred the office of the Labor Commission to the office of Owen, and it was a Senate bill in our last legislative session. And here we're looking at apprenticeships. In diversifying, again, the governor looking at how can we diversify apprenticeships. And apprenticeships, which I know many of you probably are familiar with, but it provides an individual on-the-job training, contextualized training, and for over 80 years, the DOL, Department of Labor, has overseen apprenticeship agencies and programs. And so now we have moved that office to a local office here in our state. So currently today, there's over 22,000 registered apprenticeships across the country. And so we are looking at how we can now move from the regular apprenticeships, meaning in construction industry, into healthcare, and specifically looking at nursing. And so we are working on strategies with our office of Owen and the workforce boards to see what we can do. So apprenticeships, often referred as the original four-year degree. It's a system where the training is supervised and it leads to a certification in, like I said, a trade or occupation or craft. and then combining that on-the-job training with classroom-related instruction. So the thing to know is that the training, which we call in the apprenticeship world, is usually an OJL, on-the-job learning, and that is 2,000 hours of time of on-the-job learning, which is also an on-the-job training. And then you can have the educational component is considered either a time-based or a competency-based. And there is 144 hours for all apprenticeships required for the classroom time. So the train, which we call in registered apprenticeship, is the earn and learn model. So you work in a trade, you work, and you earn a salary. So we've noticed that this has been successful in these models in the past with the traditional ones. And so now we're looking at high growth and high demand industries to align that with the high tech industries and occupation that Nevada has selected. So we received $1 million from the federal government for our state Department of Labor to put together apprenticeships, diversifying and expanding into new and in-demand industries and occupations. Currently, we are looking at building that capacity within the state. So Owen is the convener of that, and they are looking and recruiting employers and state agencies, the education system, and also looking for underrepresented population, which in turn would help our diversity in nursing, is what I see. There's an outside evaluation, and so we are moving towards industries in the state of Nevada for healthcare, education, because we lack teachers, advanced manufacturing, technology, natural resources, and we're also looking at our bread and butter here in Nevada, tourism and gaming and entertainment. And so they have hired a staff. We have a director, and we have an executive director of our office, and I have actually worked with them and developed our first apprenticeship for workforce development apprentice. And so that was passed a couple of months ago by our state council, and it is already working. We have a DOL personnel who is the trainer, and so the individuals will not only receive an apprenticeship certification, which is transferable across the United States for workforce development apprentice, but they will also receive one from him, from the Department of Labor. So just to go quickly about the framework of what we're doing with our employers. So we go and talk to employers and look to see what their job openings are. And that's how we begin the process. And we ask them, are you having difficulty finding qualified individuals? And then working with the employers, we're looking at the knowledge from them, providing the training. What is it that you want that person to know? What do you need? What does that person lack, the applicants that you're hiring? What are the experiences and the opportunities for application of the on-the-job training? And then we also obtain job descriptions, because you have to have an employer that will support that individual as they're moving through their apprenticeship. And then there's a requirement of a merit-based pay increase while they're moving through that training. And usually it comes within 6 months and 6 months, depending on the time limit and the time that you have for that. And the great benefit of that, as I spoke, is that they will receive a national occupation credential. So we're looking at the benefits of having a registered apprenticeship is that it reduces the rate of turnovers, it increases the productivity, it also develops a stable, reliable pipeline of workers, and the rate of investment has shown at least $1.30 return for every dollar invested. So now I'm going to be working with our Office of Owen to look at healthcare apprenticeships. I want to visit nursing, because most folks, when I went to nursing school, we were called nurse apprentice, and then having the employers be able to develop that piece of what they want that person to train in. And with working with Sue, this has definitely been a benefit because we have those best practices. So with that, if we have time, we can entertain questions. Or Sue, do you want to talk about the?
Let's see if we have questions. I don't know, Jennifer.
Okay.
We've got our summary here. We've achieved our goals, and we are right up against the clock. So I don't know how you'd like to proceed.
Well, thank you, Sue. Thank you, Debra. I think you did a fantastic presentation. We have a lot of great data in those slides. I do know that we got a few great questions that have come in, but just to go through and just close out the rest of the slides, there are the references here that, the places where you can find more specifics on some of the data that was cited in the presentation. And Sue and Debra have been kind enough to lend out their email addresses if you would like to contact them. And, you also have the option to share the recording of this presentation with faculty, and that will be available at go.jblearning.com/TTP. It will be available on our YouTube channel. So at this time, I really want to extend a very big thank you to both Sue Ulrich and Debra Collins for their time in putting together this data and this presentation, spending some time with us and sharing their expertise. Thank you both, and wish everyone a great rest of the day and great start to your weekend.